survivor's guilt it's ever present. And one thing I would say is that, we have to keep living our lives. And it is important that we find joy in our lives. So it's important that we kind of work through that guilt while also at the same time understanding and appreciating where that comes from. It is a natural response to what's going on.
Welcome to the Immigrant Experience in America, an immigrant human library, where we amplify and humanize the experiences of immigrants in the United States and around the world. Listen in as we add another story to our immigrant human library.
I'm thinking about your dad and what it was like for him growing up. And did he want to leave, when he got the opportunity to come over? Was it like it is today, where it's just, conflict, and he got kind of a hope of just a life opportunity to study somewhere to, provide his family with another opportunity? Well, he was single at the time, right? It sounds like it, right?
Yeah, he was single at the time. It's kind of twofold for a lot of the people who immigrate from Palestine. There's kind of an excitement that comes with the possibility of a better life. There's some hope to see what's on the other end of the rainbow. But there's also, they wouldn't be leaving if things were good back home, because of all the conflict and because of everything going on. It was hard for them to stay in their homeland. It was hard, especially for him, um, because the conflict was hitting so close to home. He's from the capital, Jerusalem, and so he didn't necessarily want to leave, but at least there was some hope for something better for him. Same for my mom. It was the same for her.
Yes. Do they tell stories of their lives growing up and challenges and, like what stories float to the top all the time that you hear them talking about?
Well, they both experienced war. My dad was actually born in 1945 when the land was still called Palestine. And so his birth certificate said Palestine. So they had a lot of stories of war. There was a 6-day war in 1967 where a lot more land was annexed by Israel, and they had some horror stories with that. The house where my mom lived, I think a bomb landed in their backyard over there on their land, and so I think both sides had to evacuate. There are some stories that they talk about, and then there's a lot that kind of don't talk about. I think growing up, they wanted to shield us from some of these horrors that they saw. But there was one story that's always kind of stuck with me that my dad told when they were escaping these bombings and the war in 1967. They came upon a man who was literally holding his intestines in his hands. He had been injured in one of these bombings, and um, he stayed with them for a while as they were escaping. But of course, there was a lot of chaos, and so he never knew what happened to that man. I can only imagine he didn't make it with that being the case. But it's one of those things that it sticks with you. I mean, they saw some real crazy stuff, that I'm glad that we live in a society and a culture here where we don't have to see these horrors. Of course, there's a lot that we're seeing on social media these days with what's going on in Gaza. But there's still a little bit of separation in that we're seeing this on a screen and not in front of us with our eyes. So yeah, they had a lot of horror stories like that.
How did your dad adjust after coming over to life in the United States, knowing what's going on the other side, what he's experienced all of his life, really, prior to migrating? Like, what was that like for him?
Good question. He always worked for Palestine. He was very active in the Palestinian community in Dallas, where we're from. or where we're living, very active in the community, always working to get the word out about Palestine, always doing a lot of activism. We grew up going to protests, and so it was kind of ingrained in me from a young age to continue to speak out and continue to do activism. Um, but there was a lot of anger too, a lot of frustration because you always hope that this is going to end sooner than later, that, some peace will come to our people, that you'll see that in your lifetime at least. And then, he died in 2001 and he died with this still happening. So he spent his entire life um, watching his land being taken away. And it was tough. There was a lot of anger. And growing up, I didn't totally understand all that anger that he had all the time. And now that I'm bearing witness to a genocide, we're seeing it on social media and on the news every day. Um, I I this past year, especially with the genocide, I am feeling a lot of that anger myself, and now I get it. Now I understand why both of my parents, were so angry all the time, um, because there's a frustration in not being able to do anything about it. There are some things we can do about it, like their boycotts have proven to be very effective, and going out and if you have the physical ability to go to protests, to post about it on social media if you can. There are things we can do to feel more empowered, and that's something I try to pass along to my clients who come to me specifically for this kind of grief work when it comes to bearing witness to genocide. There are things we can do to feel more empowered, but there's also a lot of frustration and anger in what we can't do to help the situation. And there's a lot of work that can be done and that we can do to help out. It's going to be there, but there's healthy things we can do to kind of move along with our lives in a sense, and try to cope, and do healthy coping strategies when it comes to grief and bearing witness and the sadness and the anger and all of that. But I get it now. I definitely get where he was coming from.
I wonder, there's this conversation around immigrants who are the fortunate few to come to the US or other Western places away from whether it be poverty, persecution, natural disasters, whatever the push factors are that bring people to this part of the world, called survivor's guilt, right? And there's
Yes, yes.
so I wonder, like, do you think your dad had any issues with that? Did he often talk about it? Did he seem to function with a certain sense of like responsibility and duty to people back home, to the struggle back home? Like what was that like for him in his immigrant experience?
Yeah, I'm so glad you're asking about that because there's definitely a survivor's guilt. I think they definitely experienced it in that, I mean, my parent, through my childhood, with my parents, we were not well off financially. They did struggle a lot, but there was still, you're living in a lot of safety here that over there they don't necessarily get to experience. And so we still are very fortunate to be here in this country, and so they recognized how fortunate they were, how fortunate they are. But there was definitely a guilt in that, what more can we be doing? What more can we be advocating for? There's a guilt, and the families over there, and they try to speak to them as often as they can. But they're here and they're there, and when their parents died, I think that's when I really saw that guilt come out in them, and that they weren't physically there when it happened. Their parents all kind of died fairly quickly, of heart attacks and strokes, and so those things happen very quickly. and so they weren't able to be there. And so that's when I really saw that guilt be very present in them, and that they couldn't be there. There's a lot of grief and guilt over that. And now fast forwarding to today, those of us who are born here in the US, but who are still very tied to our ethnicity and our culture, we're seeing these genocides. And I personally, and I know a lot of other people in the community, have felt a lot of survivor's guilt, and that, we're living here in luxury compared to what they're experiencing in Gaza. And so for a long time, there's a lot of guilt about going out and doing anything fun. Um, for instance, one week after October 7th, I went to a concert with a friend, and my head was buzzing the entire time. Like, I
Mm.
couldn't think about anything except for what was going on in Gaza. There's incredible guilt. Like, how can I be here at this concert? And, everybody around me is happy and experiencing all this joy. And it became pretty immediately apparent right after October 7th that what we're looking at now is a genocide. It didn't take too long for that to happen. So there was a lot of guilt in that. And I even went on my first vacation recently in quite a long time. And I couldn't bring myself to post pictures online about the vacation because I felt like it was disrespectful. We're seeing, some of us anyway, are seeing Gaza, like our entire feed is what's going on in Gaza, and people's body parts strewn about everywhere. I don't want to get too graphic about it, but we're seeing these horrific things, and it's like, how can I post about my workout or my dinner or vacation or a concert when this is happening? So the survivor's guilt it's ever present. And um, one thing I would say is that we have to keep living our lives, and it is important that we find joy in our lives. So I don't, it's important that we kind of work through that guilt while also at the same time understanding and appreciating where that comes from. It is a natural response to what's going on.
And over the years, I've come to understand that a lot of times, there's this, you hear people talk about the immigrant mentality of being industrious and just constantly hardworking and things
Yeah.
like that. But through my recent research, I'm coming to understand, like, when you see hyperachievement in the immigrant communities, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there could be trauma that's underlying that. Like, you see people who are just, they've become what I call human doings in the US. Like, they just are going, 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 can't slow down, can't make space for peace and tranquility or quiet. There's some level of trauma that behind is, usually is behind that's pushing them. And this whole issue of survivor's guilt. So this is one of the reasons why my podcast here exists, is to have these conversations so people understand, when you make a decision to move and come over on this side, it's not all peaches and cream. There's a lot of
Yeah.
issues that go with that. Mental issues, balancing the new world that you're in and the former world, and the person that
Right.
you're becoming, and then deciding, like, how attached are you going to be to the former world. I wonder if there's people in the Palestinian community or in other groups who are in similar situation where there's ongoing conflict in the place they're coming from. Like, are they able to assimilate? Are they able to really fully enjoy life here? Enjoying, quotes, like, what, everybody can define that for themselves. I wonder, how entangled are they to the old world, and do they seek mental health? Do they even recognize that there's a mental health angle to their whole immigrant experience? Because, this is a taboo subject
Yeah.
in a lot of collectivist cultures. Like,
Hmm.
you don't seek mental health, you seek,
Yeah.
perhaps it's set up differently. Like, I'm learning to, like, in some, like, for example, in African communities, you have the chief, or you have, like, communal people who are in a certain position and you go talk to them. I mean, that's their way of solving issues, not necessarily a licensed, formal licensed therapist. So there's other way around it that these the issues are
Yeah.
handled in these communities. But I wonder if how aware are people that sometimes a lot of hyperachievement is has trauma behind it.
You brought up so many good points just now. It's like I don't know where to start. Uh, I love that we're human doings, not human beings. I love that term that you came up with. There is a lot of hyperachievement, and I see it in myself as well. Keeping yourself busy. Um, yeah, there is a lot of that. I saw different types of people in the Palestinian community growing up. There are some who um, I think they all have no choice but to assimilate in some way or another. But, you see all different types where there are people like my parents who are adamant about holding on to the culture and the ethnicity and trying to be part of a larger Palestinian-American community, an Arab American community, and holding on to the language, the culture, the food, um, taking us kids back every few years. They really wanted us to stay entrenched in the culture. Um, and then there are some people I've seen on the opposite side within the community who they don't want us to be seen as different. They're tired of the racism, and so they try to fully assimilate into American cultures, as much as possible to the point where they barely even refer to themselves as, Arab American, and, they just wanna be part of the culture, and I think I've noticed that in other cultures and communities as well, where, there's some immigrants I've seen who don't even teach their children anything but English because they want them to be American and have all the same opportunities, and I get that. I do kind of, grieve over the loss of the language and the culture when I do see that happening. I think it is important to be tied to your culture, but, I do also get where they're coming from. You get tired of that racism, so I definitely get that, and I'm a hyperachiever myself, and so that's a great point that you brought up is that, you do hyperachieve and you are ambitious and you're always doing and things like that, and that's something that I'm working on with myself, and something that I'm working on with my clients is that we still have to take time to allow ourselves the grief, especially when it comes to the losses we've had as well as the racism that we've experienced. I didn't even realize until a few years ago that that's something you can grieve is racism that you've experienced. It
Mhm.
didn't even occur to me. You just keep going. Um, but yeah, these things are all important to take time for. And I know we're busier than ever in today's cultures, um, or in today's society, we're busier than ever. But it really is important to, even if it's a couple minutes here and there throughout the day, to just take time to ground yourself, or to take time to practice some mindfulness, to take time to, even if you have to schedule time to grieve, make that time, and so that's something I'm always, working on with myself as well, and then emphasizing the clients too.
Right. And it's funny because we might think we don't feel physically threatened here, right?
Right.
There's physical safety. We have access to so much. But sometimes that mental clash and turmoil between the old and the new can really rival life on the other side, whether it's persecution, conflict, or whatever is going on back there, or even poverty that people are struggling every day with.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience journey that I'm pursuing, trying to understand myself too. It's funny because I'm looking at you and the terms that you're using, and if I were to see you in public, I would just basically, the typical social construct that what we call racism, right? If I were to just see you in public, phenotypically, I'm thinking, okay, you classify in the white box, right? But increasingly, when you see the forms out there that you have to complete, there's white, black, or African American, Pacific Islander, Hispanic or not Hispanic. I mean, it just changes all the time depending on where you are and who's creating these things. So I wonder, like, how are people differentiating or figuring out who you are? Is it the name? Because if you're born here and you learn English and you're going to American schools, you're a typical white kid. Like how are people figuring you out in the crowd? Because they can look at me immediately, I don't fit, right, with their group. So wow, like it's just amazing just how people can like find the craziest things to kind of find to cause to be
Yeah.
divisive about or to
Oh,
make
yeah.
somebody feel like the other. So is it the last name or is what is it about you?
It's a few things. It's such an interesting thing, that yeah, it has definitely been an issue my entire life. Not only is it the name, I mean, only in the past few years have I been going by Olivia professionally. My birth name, my real first name is Hiam. People had a lot of trouble pronouncing my name. So finally, a few years ago, I started using Olivia, and it made my life infinitely easier when it came to the workplace and professional settings because it actually saved me a lot of time having to spell it and having to pronounce it out for people, and then them still avoiding saying my name because they're never going to get it. Um, but yeah, growing up, I've always had an ethnically ambiguous look. People couldn't quite tell where we were from. They just knew we weren't quite white. But we did have to, on forms, identify as white because for the longest time, Middle Eastern was not its own separate designation. Middle Eastern are now SWANA, which is, I think, what is it? Uh, Southwest Asian and North African, I believe. So these designations didn't exist really until recently. Still on a lot of forms to this day, you're either Black or Hispanic or Pacific Islander or white. It's those four things, and that's it. And so a lot of the times these days, I have to check other. I'm always excited when I see that there is a MENA or a SWANA designation, um, because I've been treated differently my whole life. We're not. I might have a lighter skin tone, but we're not white. And we know that because we have not been treated as white our whole life. We've always been treated as different. We've always been othered. Um, and it's funny, I was talking about that with my mom the other day. When I was in high school and it came time to apply for scholarships and grants and things like that, I didn't qualify for any minority scholarships because we weren't seen as we were just sort of ushered into white. We had to classify as white, and so I didn't get any of those scholarships. I wasn't qualified for minority scholarships.
Mm.
um and I was talking to my mom about that the other day, and she was like, yeah, we're always other. We always have to check other. We're other. We don't even get any sort of designation. We're just other. And so it really hit home, like, not only are you actually othered, your entire existence, but you are classified a lot of the time as other. And so it really does
Wow.
make you feel as the odd one out in a lot of situations. A lot of the time I am the only Arab American or Middle Easterner in a room. I'm always other, and so I've always been very aware of that in any situation that I'm in.
Hmm. Wow, that's so interesting. And I think it would be interesting for people in the, I want to say, like typically like African diaspora space, or maybe people who like easily can be looked at and say, okay, that person is Latino, Latina, Hispanic, or like Native American, or certain parts of the world where people kind of look a certain way and you can tell what group they're in. But sometimes, wow, yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Like you go into a room with other folks who would be classified white, what immediately something about you puts you in another box
Right.
among that group. That this thing is so problematic on so many levels.
Yeah. I think society really wants to put you in boxes, like people like their boxes. They like to classify. We can't all just be one thing, we can't all just be people or human beings. We have to be in our little classifications and our boxes. And that would be fine if it didn't also lead to racism and prejudices and things like that. That's why that's so problematic.
Right. Coming from a mentality of scarce resources and lack and who gets access
Yep.
and things like that. So it could be seen as like an economic driver of the behavior. I'm sure there's other reasons, right? But probably heavily economic behind it, like who gets access to what and who doesn't, who
Right.
performs these certain roles and things like that. Some people argue it's a caste system, kind of like you hear of caste with associated with India, but then you also look at other places around the world and you figure, oh wow, it's pretty similar. Like
Yeah.
what's going on, right?
Yeah,
But
exactly. I mean, on the census, Arab Americans and Middle Easterners in general are very underrepresented because we are told on the US Census to classify ourselves as white. Um, and there have been within the Arab American and Middle Eastern communities, there have been efforts to tell people like, no, write in Middle Eastern or whatever, but I mean, it's put in writing on there, classify as white if you're Middle Eastern. And so we're very underrepresented in the census numbers. I don't think there are accurate counts. And like you're saying, when it comes to economics and stuff, we're not provided with um, some of the governmental and economic help that some other communities get. Because again, we don't get classified as minorities like other people do, while we're still treated as minorities our entire lives.
that's an interesting space to occupy. And I think I heard two persons discussing this, that I think one is from, I want to say, the other side of Pakistan, Pakistani. But when you look at her, she doesn't quite look kind of that South Asian Indian type of a look. And so they were making the same argument that they're treated as minorities,
Mhm.
and they are not able to claim certain boxes or get certain benefits that clearly identified for minority groups. But then they're not really accepted in the white group either, because they're
Yeah,
when they go around it, they're treated differently. And so wow, it's quite problematic.
yeah,
I came
for
across
sure.
a comedian recently. He was just saying, "Can I please see the color chart and who made it up?" Because you have black people who are very pale complexion who are considered black, but then you have people from certain parts of the world who are claiming to be white, who are darker than the palest black person. And so he was joking. He's like, "Can somebody please bring out the color chart?" This thing is so problematic on so many
Yeah.
levels. To even have conversation around, you'll hear somebody say, "Well, I had lunch with an Indian and a white person, or an Indian and or they'll use ethnicity and race in the same sentence, and it gets kind of crazy because I'm like, okay, so who's this Indian person? Who's this white person? Are they from Europe? Or are they from the Middle East? Because there's so many people, even from Latin America, who are claiming the white box now. And so when you don't know people's ethnicities or their part of the world that they're from, you really don't know who they are, and it gets
Yeah,
problematic, right? And so they're not counted, as you're pointing out. You don't know their culture. How do you build rapport with these people? You don't know where they're from, what they eat like, what language they speak. Yeah, it just breaks down in so many levels, right? So
it
I
does.
tend to
Yeah.
say that I'm Afro-Caribbean rather than just using the term black, because it really doesn't, it's a very diminishing type of a word that people use. It takes away from you rather than add value to who you are and the value that you bring.
Join us next time for part 3 of this episode. We thank our listeners around the world, and we appreciate your continued support as we build our human library. Please remember to give us a 5-star review, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, and circle of influence.